In 1877, a man inherited roughly $95 million in a single day, the largest inheritance in American history up to that point. Within 9 years, he had doubled it. For a brief window in the 1880s, he was, by most measures, the richest man on the planet. You've almost certainly heard his last name. You've probably never heard his first name. This is the story of William Henry Vanderbilt, the son who took the largest fortune in America and made it even bigger, then spent the rest of his life being treated like a footnote to his own father. To understand William Henry Vanderbilt, you have to start with the shadow he was born into. His father was Cornelius Vanderbilt, known as the Commodore, a man who had clawed his way up from running a small ferry boat in New York as a teenager to controlling a shipping and railroad empire worth more than the entire United States Treasury at the time. Cornelius Vanderbilt wasn't just rich. He was a legend, a self-made titan, ruthless, brilliant, and famously difficult to please. And for most of his early life, William Henry Vanderbilt looked like the family disappointment. He was the oldest son, born in 1821, and by most accounts he was quiet, cautious, and methodical, the exact opposite of his aggressive, larger-than-life father. As a young man, William suffered a nervous breakdown and was sent off to run a small, struggling farm on Staten Island, essentially exiled from the family business. His father openly doubted whether William had what it took to ever run anything of real significance. Here's the twist. William quietly turned that failing farm into one of the most productive and profitable farms on Staten Island. He didn't do it with flash or bravado. He did it with discipline, patience, and careful attention to detail, the same qualities everyone had assumed made him weak. Slowly, his father started to notice. Cornelius began giving William small responsibilities within the family's railroad holdings, testing him. And time and again, William delivered, not with dramatic public wins, but with steady, competent management that quietly made the businesses under his control more efficient and more profitable. By the 1860s and early 1870s, William Henry Vanderbilt had become his father's most trusted operator, eventually running the day-to-day operations of the New York Central Railroad, one of the crown jewels of the Vanderbilt Empire. The son once written off as too soft for business turned out to be exactly what a sprawling, complicated empire needed, someone who could actually manage it, not just build it. When Cornelius Vanderbilt died in 1877, he left the overwhelming majority of his fortune, somewhere around $95 million, directly to William, deliberately bypassing more equal distribution among his other children. Cornelius wanted the empire to stay concentrated and intact, and he trusted William, finally, to be the one to hold it together. At the time, $95 million wasn't just a lot of money. It represented an almost unprecedented concentration of private wealth in American history, more than the entire United States federal government held in its treasury in some years of that era. Most people who inherit a fortune that size do one of two things: they coast on it or they blow it. William Henry Vanderbilt did neither. He grew it. Over the next 9 years, through careful management of the family's railroad holdings, strategic consolidation, and disciplined reinvestment, William doubled the fortune his father left him, reportedly reaching somewhere around $200 million by the time of his own death in 1885. To put that into perspective using modern comparisons, some economic historians estimate that adjusted for the relative size of the American economy at the time, William Henry Vanderbilt's fortune would represent one of the largest personal wealth totals relative to national GDP in United States history, on par with or exceeding some of the wealthiest individuals alive today. For a brief period in the 1880s, William Henry Vanderbilt was, by most reasonable estimates, the richest person in the world. So how did a quiet, methodical farmer's son manage to double the largest fortune in American history? The short answer is railroads, and the long answer is control. William didn't just manage the New York Central Railroad. He expanded the family's dominance over railroad infrastructure connecting New York to Chicago and the broader Midwest, consolidating competing lines, negotiating favorable agreements, and systematically reducing the kind of costly competition that had eaten into profits during his father's era. he also became a major lender and investor beyond railroads themselves, using the family's enormous capital reserves to finance other industrial ventures, effectively turning the Vanderbilt fortune into one of the largest private investment operations in the country. But here's what made William different from his father, and honestly, different from most of the famous robber barons of the era. He was notably risk-averse. Where Cornelius Vanderbilt had built his empire through aggressive, sometimes brutal competitive tactics, William focused heavily on stability, consolidation, and reducing risk across the family's holdings. At one point, reportedly overwhelmed by the stress of managing such a massive and centralized fortune, William began deliberately distributing large blocks of stock among his children, partly to reduce the pressure and liability of holding so much concentrated wealth personally, and partly as an early, informal form of estate planning. This decision, while it may have reduced his personal stress, also had a long-term effect that historians now point to directly. It began the slow dispersal of what had been one of the most concentrated fortunes in American history. William Henry Vanderbilt died in 1885, just 8 years after inheriting his father's fortune, having roughly doubled it in that short window. At the time of his death, he was widely regarded as the wealthiest man in the world. And yet, if you ask most people today to name a famous Vanderbilt, they'll say Cornelius, the swashbuckling founder. Or they'll bring up the Gilded Age mansions of William's own children and grandchildren, the ones who built the massive Newport estates and Fifth Avenue palaces most associated with the Vanderbilt name in popular memory today. William himself, the man who actually held the peak of the fortune, tends to get skipped entirely. So why did the man who was briefly the richest person on earth get erased from popular memory? A few reasons. First, William Henry Vanderbilt was, by nearly every account, an intensely private and unflashy person, especially compared to both his father before him and his children after him. He reportedly disliked public attention, avoided high society spectacle, and focused on quiet, disciplined management rather than the kind of dramatic public displays of wealth that tend to get remembered by history. There's actually a famous, though possibly embellished, quote attributed to him when pressed by reporters about public opinion of his business practices. He allegedly responded with a dismissive remark along the lines of the public having no claim on his decisions, a phrase later mangled by newspapers into the far more infamous line, "The public be damned." That quote, whether accurate or exaggerated, followed him for the rest of his life and painted him as cold and dismissive, even though many historians argue it doesn't reflect his generally cautious, low-key personality. Second, and maybe most importantly, his children absolutely dominated the cultural spotlight in the following decades. The famous Vanderbilt mansions, the massive Gilded Age social events, the family's association with extravagant wealth and status in popular culture. Nearly all of that came from William's children and grandchildren, not from William himself. History tends to remember spectacle, and William deliberately avoided creating any. Third, because he split the fortune among his children rather than keeping it concentrated the way his father had, there was never again a singular Vanderbilt fortune, pointing back to him the way there had been under Cornelius. The wealth diffused, and so did the historical spotlight that tends to follow concentrated power. But strip away the quiet personality and the family name recognition problem, and the numbers speak for themselves. He took the largest inheritance in American history, and instead of shrinking it through mismanagement, the fate of so many second-generation fortunes throughout history, he doubled it, methodically, carefully, and quietly, until for one brief window, he stood at the very top of global wealth. The son, once considered too soft for business, ended up outperforming the legendary father everyone assumed had already achieved the ceiling of what one family could accumulate. This series is about finding people like him again, the ones whose achievements got buried under louder names, louder stories, or louder descendants. If you want the next forgotten billionaire, let me know in the comments who you want covered next, and subscribe, because sometimes the most successful person in a family isn't the one everyone remembers.